Good. Now, today apparently is Black Friday, and I wonder what on earth they meant by Black Friday. Apparently today is the day when the big bosses have earned more money than a lot of people earn in the whole year, which is great if you're a boss. I have to admit, I haven't... Is it Fat Cat Friday? I thought it was Black Friday. I'm sure it said that on the BBC when I was watching that. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's one of those... it's just an excuse to talk about something. Fat Cat Friday as opposed to Black Friday, but similar sort of thing. This is when everybody who is a chief executive and somebody who is a boss of a company earns an enormous amount of money, and can they justify it, particularly when people who are doing most of the work are actually getting paid nothing. Daniel Pryor is head of programs at the Adam Smith Institute and joins us now. Daniel, does that mean are you a CEO? Are you one of these guys getting huge amounts of money being the head of programs there?
Sadly not, I'm afraid. Unfortunately, working in the non-profit world doesn't pay as well as some people think.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to me that a lot of businesses are telling their workforce, oh, no, we can't give you a pay rise because we're not doing terribly well. Case in point, of course, a lot of people are working and claiming in-work benefits. And a lot of the people who are doing that on very bad wages are working in organisations, excuse me, like supermarkets, who are making a lot of money. And we're part paying their wages. I don't understand that at all.
So I think that they're two separate issues. I think low pay is clearly a problem, as you say, but I don't think that kind of cracking down on CEO pay is necessarily the way to go. CEOs do actually matter an awful lot to companies increasingly. As we live in a more globalized world, companies become bigger, and the decisions that they make can really have a huge impact on things like stock prices, for example.
But a lot of them are pretty useless at their jobs, it seems, and they get fired fairly quickly, and then they get moved on to be CEO of another company.
They are. So I'm certainly not arguing that all CEOs are, absolutely flawless and perfect and things like that. But it's important to note that if you end up cracking down on this and you drive away the sort of top talent that Britain currently attracts in these big companies, what you're going to get is, on average, worse CEOs, and that means worse firm performance, less jobs, things like that.
If the people who are working for them are on in-work benefits, they're not doing very good jobs. I mean, they're not doing very good jobs because they're not making enough money to pay their workforce, yet they're paying themselves huge bonuses and huge salaries. How does that work?
Well, I think it depends on what you mean by in-work benefits. I think it's perfectly reasonable for in-work benefits to be one way of alleviating low-wage work. I
don't think it is. Explain to me exactly how that works. Why should I, as a taxpayer, actually subsidise a company who are paying their chief executive £3.5 million a year when they're not paying their staff enough money for them to be able to live on?
Well, look, let me focus for a second on how important a CEO is and why it is that they're worth this sort of money. If you take an example like Burberry, right? When I went to secondary school in Essex, and if you remember, originally Burberry was kind of associated with this sort of chavvy brand, for want of a better word.
Well, because you're a lot younger than me, when I went to school, Burberry was a very upmarket brand and not considered to be a very chavvy brand at all.
So it certainly went through this stage of being seen as a slightly lower quality brand and a kind of chavvy brand. And what happened was that Angela Ahrendts became the CEO of Burberry, and she took these steps to crack down on kind of counterfeits and use marketing strategies to really get back that premium brand. And when she left that company, it lost nearly £500 million in value. So that sort of reflects, I think, just how important these kind of top-level decisions are.
That's
and
one
those top-level
CEO.
Decisions,
and I would agree with you that if they did that, then they deserved the money they got. And I am sure that the people who worked at Burberry's, particularly in their big stores, got paid a decent amount of money and probably didn't have to claim an in-work benefit. Answer me this. How can the CEOs of some of these huge supermarkets who are making huge amounts of money actually pay their checkout staff so little that they're all on benefits as well?
Well, I think it's important to think about why
it is that people get wages. Sack a few of them, don't you?
Well, it depends on how they're performing compared to other CEOs. I think if they're performing badly, then
the company's performing well, right from the bottom up, people need to be rewarded so that the company and the people working in the company feel that they are part of it and that they have some share in it.
Well, it depends how much value a particular worker adds to a company in terms of their bottom line. So if someone working in a checkout, for example, is paid £100 an hour, clearly that's not sustainable. They need to be paid according to the value.
No one's going to be paid £100 an hour. Come on. I mean,
no, but I'm illustrating a general principle here, which is that you need to pay people the value that they create for a company.
Well, if you didn't have checkout staff, you wouldn't be taking any money in a supermarket. So I think they're quite, they're probably quite important.
For sure. And there are some supermarkets that have a model of paying checkout staff more, and that's the point of a kind of competitive marketplace for supermarkets. Some try different things, and some things work and some don't.
I mean, let's leave the CEOs for a moment. Middle management, which we seem to have an enormous amount of in this country. I look around and I see middle managers trying to make reasons for their existence all over the place.
I think I'm technically one of them, actually.
I'm not suggesting that for one moment, Daniel, but I could name a few anyway. But, oh no, they're all going out of the control room now. Good. We seem to have a lot of middle management involved in businesses in this country that I quite often wonder what the hell they do. And they get paid a reasonable amount of money for wandering around, having a meeting and disappearing somewhere else. And yet the people who make the wealth, I sound a bit like a socialist, trust me, I'm not. And people who make the wealth are struggling. Nobody's getting very much in the way of pay rises. I think I earn half what I earned about 10 years ago.
Well, I think we can all raise our eyebrows at the kind of boozy lunches and that sort of culture that you can get in middle management, but it's the same sort of principle that applies to CEOs. They might not be making those top-level decisions, the ones that really affect the firm's bottom line, but the decisions they make on an everyday basis still matter for things like productivity, for how much profit they make.
Daniel, I'm absolutely sure you're right, but what I'm suggesting is that a lot of these people are given contracts that make it very difficult to fire them. Excuse me, or get rid of them. Maybe they need to be given contracts where if they're not doing the job properly, rather than getting promoted sideways, they're kicked out.
Yeah, for sure. And I think some companies tend to do that quite effectively. There's this, this trade-off, as you say, between do you want to make sure you've got a stable job, or do you want to maybe have performance-related pay in a slightly less secure job? And I think that, personally, I prefer to be on things like performance-related pay. I'm not, sadly, but, or happily, depending on how you think this interview's going.
Well, maybe you should. I mean, it seems to me that I've always been in a job where you're only as good as what you did yesterday or what you did a few days ago. And that's how a lot of people should be, particularly in the higher echelons.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the big issues with this whole debate about high pay and even middle management is that a lot of the time the solutions being proposed, things like maximum wages or a CEO can only earn 10 times what someone on the ground working the shop floor can work. The problem with these is pretty clear. If you apply it to football, for example, if you imagine Harry Kane, I'm a Spurs supporter myself, I don't know if that's going to go down well or badly.
I don't know anything about football, so I don't care, but go on.
So Harry Kane, if we restricted his wages to 10 times what the groundsman at Tottenham's
I think that's a slightly different thing. I think once you start talking about celebrities, you start talking about, it's a completely different thing, which is why the BBC got themselves all upset about whether one newsreader should get paid more than another and all that sort of thing. It has a completely different issue. But when you're talking about people who are doing the same sort of job, and so a boss of a company, depending on how well the company goes, really ought not to be earning so much money that within the first couple of weeks of the year they've earned more than most of their staff. I mean, we seem to pay our executives a huge amount in this country, yet everybody else is struggling. And there's this huge disconnect between the workforce and the management, which isn't going to bode well for the future.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons I'd use this football metaphor, just to get at it, because I actually think they are more similar than perhaps you do. I mean, think about the reason why Harry Kane is paid more than Teddy Sheringham, Tottenham's former brilliant striker. One of the reasons is that football clubs have become more global, and that means that the decisions they make and the players they hire have far more of an impact on how many people they get into the ground, what they get from TV revenues. So it's important that they have to pay these big wages.
Look, the thing is, and I think you're missing the point here, sure. The thing is that if a CEO is doing well and the company's doing well, you can pay them whatever they want. I don't care. They can have everything. But I see a lot of these companies where the CEOs and the middle management get paid quite well and then turn around to the workforce and say there isn't enough money to put your wages up. Now, that's wrong.
Well, it depends, because what you need to do...
How can that depend? It is wrong.
I don't think it is necessarily, no. I think if you're a CEO and you're making a very positive impact on the bottom line of a firm, even if that firm isn't performing particularly well, then you should be paid that amount of money. Because
why should you
if
be
someone
paid
else
that amount of money if that firm isn't really performing very well?
Well, because it might be doing worse if you weren't there. That's what I'm saying. Obviously, there are cases where CEOs absolutely suck. They're terrible. And usually, eventually, people get fired for that. If you take Microsoft, for example, someone like Steve Ballmer, he was CEO of them from, I think, 2013, 2014 sort of time. And when he got fired because he was performing so badly, he didn't invest in the right sort of growing technologies. What ended up happening is that Microsoft gained about 7% on their stock price. It's billions of pounds that they gained. So I think that companies have a really good incentive to root out bad CEOs. Sometimes they make the wrong calls, for sure.
I don't know whether it's just me. Maybe I'm a bit stupid. I don't know. But I still do not understand this whole business that a CEO gets paid huge amounts of money when the company can't afford to pay the workforce. I don't understand that. And I really don't understand how there has been such a discrepancy. I've met loads of CEOs. I've interviewed hundreds of people, some of them completely stupid and thick and often wonder how they get their jobs. Some amazingly clever, you know. I don't think I've ever met a cleverer man who I know quite well than Theo Pathetis, who's taken companies but looks after his staff, encourages his staff, goes around and sees his staff, makes his staff feel they're part of a family. Richard Branson does the same sort of thing. Why on earth are these quite a lot of faceless people who are businessmen, born into business families and got business and really quite dull, a lot of them, and they expect this sort of salary and they expect that they'll get another job and it doesn't matter. But the companies are paying the staff absolute peanuts, and the staff quite often are treated appallingly as well. I don't understand why these people are not weeded out. If your company cannot afford to pay your staff a decent living wage, then you ought not to be getting any kind of bonus at all. In fact, you shouldn't be on a few million a year. You should be on a lot less. Probably you'd be better kicked out.
Well, let's take a company that might pay its workers a fairly low wage, but that's because it's traditionally a lower skilled job. I think it makes sense. The higher skilled job you are in general, the higher wage you get. Now, if you're creating and offering jobs for, again, something like a checkout worker, which is an important job. I washed pots when I was younger, and that's another example, a job that's kind of low skilled. And it's important that a CEO is able to create those jobs in the first place rather than them not exist. Now, obviously, it'd be better if they were higher paid, but people have to start somewhere on the work ladder. I don't think
if you don't have the pot washer in the restaurant, there's no point in having a chef, no point in having waiters, you know, and obviously if you're a chef, if you're a waiter, slightly more skilled, but you know, those people from the bottom job up, they are all necessary to keep the whole thing going, to use your analogy. And all I'm saying is that the discrepancy between what the guys at the top, ladies at the top, whatever you want, are getting, and the workforce has now moved to a situation where it's ridiculous. So if you're a boss and you can get an 11% rise and you're doing remarkably well, but somebody who's actually making the money, making the business for you, is told, no, we don't have enough money to pay you, but we're going to pay the boss another 11% because, you know, it's great. And he's a great bloke and everybody wants him if we didn't have him. But actually, we're not doing very well. We can't pay you. So I don't understand that.
So that seems to be one of the key problems that an awful lot of people have with CEO pay. Over time, CEOs are getting paid more and more. And that's one of the problems, not just that they're getting highly paid, but that their wages are going up.
So if you could go back to Adam Smith and have a chat with him and bring out a paper and sort it out, Daniel, I'd be very, very happy.
Oh, thank you very much.
That's all right. Daniel Pryor, head of programs. I don't know which program. What programs are you head of?
Education. I do a lot of our research work, things like this.
Okay. Well, I'll have a chat to Adam and see what he can do about CEO's pay. Thank you for that, Daniel. Now, if you want to join us, 034...